They laid the papers in front of me, told me not to worry, just sign, but I had already called my lawyer. It was a sunny afternoon, warm enough that I left the windows open just to feel the breeze move through the curtains like it used to when David was alive. That day, my daughter Kelsey and my son Evan came over with coffee, smiles, and a manila folder. "Hey, Mom, you look great today," Kelsey said, placing a lukewarm caramel latte in front of me. It was my usual order, but from the wrong cafe, the one closer to her house, not mine. She hadn't asked. It didn't matter. I smiled anyway. Evan sat across from me at the dining table, already flipping through pages. Just some paperwork to help streamline things, simplify the estate stuff. I looked at them both, grown adults, parents themselves now, but I still remembered holding Evan's tiny hand as he clung to my leg on the first day of kindergarten. I remembered Kelsey crying over a scraped knee and only calming down when I kissed the bandage. I remembered everything, and in that moment, I felt a deep, quiet ache that I had raised them to be efficient, but not always kind. I glanced down at the documents. It wasn't the first time they had mentioned simplifying things. For the past few weeks, there had been subtle nudges, remarks about how large the house was, how much upkeep it required. "You deserve something easier," Kelsey had said last week. "You should be relaxing, not worrying about roof repairs." But this wasn't about the roof. I knew that now. "Just sign at the bottom," Evan said, handing me a pen. "It's all standard, nothing to worry about." My fingers curled around the pen, but I didn't move. Instead, I looked back up at them, two faces I had loved more than my own, now waiting for my blind trust. "You don't need to read it all," Kelsey added, her voice sweet like sugar coating on something rotten. "We already did." That was the moment I knew, the moment I stopped being their mother, the woman they called for comfort, guidance, safety, and became an obstacle. So I smiled. "I'll look it over tonight," I said, gently sliding the folder toward me. "My eyes get tired after lunch, you understand?" They hesitated, just a flicker of it. Then the smiles returned. "Of course," Kelsey said, standing up and brushing non-existent lint from her coat. "Just let us know when you're done." They left 10 minutes later, talking about dinner reservations on the way out. They didn't hug me goodbye. They used to, even last year they still did. As soon as the door clicked shut, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years, my husband's old lawyer, Mr. Danner. He was still alive, still sharp, still owed me a favor. "May," he answered, voice warm with recognition. "It's been a while." I told him everything. The house, the pressure, the folder I hadn't yet opened. His response was quiet and deliberate. "Don't sign anything. I'll be there in an hour." And just like that, I knew I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was being cornered by my own children. I sat at the table, folder unopened, and stared out the window. The breeze had died down and the air felt still. I didn't feel betrayed, not yet. That came later. What I felt was something far more dangerous. Clarity. Clarity that I had given everything to these children: time, money, forgiveness, second chances, and they thought I wouldn't read a document that could take everything away from me. They didn't know me at all, but they were about to. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Before the folder, before the legal jargon, before the lawyer, the recording, the shock, there was love, or at least what I believed was love. I raised Evan and Kelsey in this very house, the same one they now seem so eager to sell. Back then, it was more than a house. It was a home made of worn couches, cereal bowls left in the sink, laughter behind bedroom doors, and movie nights that ran too late on school nights. David, my husband, had built the fence out back with his own hands. Every crooked nail and uneven plank still stands as a monument to the life we built, even though he's been gone 7 years now. It was in that same backyard where we taught the kids how to ride their bikes, holding the back of the seat as they pedaled like their lives depended on it. Kelsey fell and scraped her knee once. I remember how she screamed until David carried her inside like she was made of glass. Evan climbed the oak tree every spring to watch the birds hatch. I used to worry he'd fall. He never did. After David passed, things changed, but not right away. At first, they came around often. Kelsey would visit every Friday after her open houses, bringing leftover pastries from whatever home tour she had staged that day. Evan dropped by with his son Danny on Sundays, always in a rush, always apologizing for needing to leave early. It felt like love. It felt like family. I kept myself busy, volunteered at the library, made casseroles for church gatherings, called Helen when the house felt too quiet. There were evenings I sat by the fireplace and read the letters David had written me before we married, back when everything was new and full of promise. I believed my family would never let me drift too far from their lives. I had earned that closeness, hadn't I? Kelsey called me her anchor. She said I kept her grounded. Evan used to say I was the only one who understood him, that his wife didn't even come close. I believed those things. I needed to believe them because if I didn't, I'd have to face the truth that slowly, without warning, I was becoming more memory than mother, more obligation than comfort. Still, I tried. Every holiday, I cleaned and cooked from scratch, pecan pie from David's mother's recipe, roast chicken with rosemary from our garden. I set out the good dishes, I ironed the tablecloth, I made the house warm the way David liked it. I told myself they'd remember, they'd see the effort, they'd feel the love. But little things began to change. Evan stopped bringing Danny. He always had a reason, a soccer game, he'd say, or Tammy wants him to rest. Kelsey began arriving late, leaving early. Sometimes she didn't come at all. They still smiled, still said, "Love you, Mom." But it began to feel automated, like a button they pushed out of habit, not intention. Even so, I didn't question it, not then. I told myself this was the natural order of things. Children grow, their lives get busy, their parents become side characters in their own homes. But I never stopped showing up. I watched their dogs when they went out of town. I paid off Kelsey's credit card one Christmas when she said business was slow. I lent Evan money twice and told him to forget about paying me back. When Evan's furnace broke midwinter, I sent him my space heater and wrapped myself in extra sweaters for a week. When Kelsey got sick with the flu, I drove soup across town and sat in her living room while she slept, just to make sure she was still breathing. That was love, that was motherhood. But now I see what it also was, training. I had unknowingly trained them to believe that I would never ask questions, never say no, never read the fine print, that I would sign, agree, nod because I trusted them. And trust in the wrong hands can become the sharpest kind of betrayal. At the time, I didn't see it. I still believed we were a family, even if I was the only one holding on to that belief. But all of that security, all of that comfort, it was a curtain. And the moment I peeked behind it, everything changed. It was a Sunday afternoon when I first noticed something that didn't sit right, not an outright betrayal, but a shift, subtle, slippery. The kind of moment that if you blinked, you could miss. Evan had invited himself over. That wasn't unusual. He often dropped by when he needed something, a casserole dish, a break from Tammy, or advice he wouldn't admit to needing. That day, he asked if I could help him organize the garage. I should have known something was off right then. Evan had never cared about storage until something he wanted didn't fit. Still, I said, yes, of course I did. We spent the better part of the morning shifting boxes, stacking holiday decorations, and labeling old bins. When we took a break, I made us lemonade, and we sat on the back porch, the one David built with the chipped paint and the creaky step I never fixed. Evan looked tired, but there was something else in his eyes, calculation. He sipped his drink, then casually said, "You know, Mom, this place could sell for a fortune right now. You're sitting on at least 7 figures. I laughed at first, thinking it was just one of his exaggerated statements. Well, it's not for sale. Besides, this old house wouldn't know what to do without me rattling around inside it. But he didn't laugh back. "I'm serious," he said, setting the glass down. You don't need all this space. 3 bedrooms, a yard you barely touch, a roof that needs constant repairs. It's a lot for one person. My smile wavered. It's also the home where you grew up. He leaned back, hands behind his head, like he was easing into a negotiation. Exactly. And wouldn't it make sense to turn it into something useful for the next generation? Danny's going to need help with college soon, and Kelsey's been struggling with rent. You could buy a nice condo somewhere, low maintenance, maybe even in the same building as Aunt Helen. I didn't respond right away. The air felt thick. His words sounded helpful, but they weren't coated in love. They felt planned, practiced. I've managed just fine here, I said gently but firmly. Besides, this house has been paid off for years. That's when I caught it. Just a flicker, a glance too fast, a breath too shallow, like I'd said something he wasn't ready for. Yeah, he muttered, but holding on to an asset like this, it's just not smart anymore. Asset. That was the first time I heard him refer to the home I had poured my life into as an asset, not a memory, not a legacy, not the place where his father died holding my hand. It stung, but I nodded and let the conversation drift elsewhere. I told myself I was overthinking, that Evan was just being practical, not heartless. I wanted to believe that. But then a week later, Kelsey came by with similar language. She was sitting at the kitchen island, swirling her coffee slowly the way she does when she's winding up to something. Have you thought about moving, Mom? She asked suddenly. I looked up from the grocery list I'd been writing. Moving? I mean, yeah, the market's hot. It would be silly not to capitalize on that, don't you think? I frowned. Capitalize? You've been here almost 40 years. Imagine the retirement freedom you could have, travel, ease, less stress. I don't feel stressed, she smiled, but it wasn't warm. You wouldn't have to worry about the water heater going out again. I didn't mind calling the plumber, she shrugged. Well, Evan and I were talking. And there it was again. Evan and I were talking. The words buzzed in my ears, a quiet coordination, a shared agenda I was never invited into. That's when the realization struck. This wasn't concern. This was a campaign, and they were speaking to me like someone in the way. That night, I stood in the hallway and stared at the family portraits lining the wall, young Evan in his cap and gown, Kelsey grinning with her first tooth missing, me and David in front of this very house, keys in hand, faces full of hope. I ran my finger along the edge of the frame and whispered, "What are you two up to?" I didn't have the answer yet, but I had the question, and that was the beginning of everything. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about being erased. It starts quietly. One forgotten call, one missed birthday, one polite smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. It was little things at first. The weekly phone calls that used to last hours began shortening, then skipping altogether. Kelsey stopped asking about my garden. She used to love updates on the tomatoes, even asked for some every summer. This year, she didn't mention them. Evan's text became clipped. Functional. Can't talk. Busy. Send the paperwork. We'll call later. Later rarely came. I told myself it was just life. They were adults now, parents, professionals, busy people. But the silence didn't feel busy. It felt intentional. I noticed it in how they stopped seeing me, not just physically but emotionally. I'd be talking and realize halfway through a sentence that no one was listening. During a family dinner at Evan's house, I was recounting an old story about their father, about how we couldn't afford a crib when Evan was born, so we used a dresser drawer for the first few weeks. I looked up mid-laugh to find both Evan and Kelsey looking at their phones. Kelsey didn't even look up. She just said, "That's cute, Mom," without hearing a word of it. There was a moment, sharp and sour, when I realized I wasn't telling them a story anymore. I was trying to prove I mattered. I was trying to remind them. I stopped bringing up my back pain. They weren't listening. I stopped offering to babysit. They stopped asking. Even when I tried to contribute, to help, to serve the way I always had, it was met with resistance, like I was overstepping. When I offered to co-sign for Kelsey's mortgage renewal, she smiled and said, "It's okay, Mom. You don't really understand how modern finance works." Modern finance? I was married to a man who built our financial future from scratch. I raised 2 children through recessions, job losses, and hospital stays. But now, somehow, I wasn't even qualified to offer advice. My home slowly turned into a waiting room. I would make extra food in case someone dropped by. They didn't. I'd leave porch lights on longer than needed just in case someone came by late. No one did. I baked Evan's favorite apple crisp and wrapped a portion for him in the fridge. It went bad, untouched. There's a cruelty in being needed only for your utility, a deeper one in realizing that once your usefulness fades, so does your place in the room. And still, I showed up. I remembered birthdays. I sent thinking of you cards. I asked about Di's grades and Kelsey's listings. I said I love you at the end of every call, even when I was the only one saying it. I clung to the rituals because they were the last things left. But inside me, something was shifting quietly. Not anger, not yet, just grief. Not over the past, over the present, over how quickly a mother becomes a burden, how fast thank you becomes we've got it. The final crack came the day I offered to cover the property tax bill. It had come in higher than expected, and I still had money in the savings account David and I built together. I mentioned it over the phone casually, like I always had. Kelsey paused, then said, "You really don't need to do that. It's kind of your responsibility anyway, isn't it?" I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear after she hung up, listening to the silence buzz. My responsibility, my house, my children, my effort, my sacrifice. But now I was a task, a line item, a problem to be managed. That night, I didn't cook dinner. I poured cereal into a chipped bowl and ate it standing up, staring at the window. The wind had knocked over one of the flower pots David had placed years ago. I didn't go outside to fix it. I remember thinking, this is what it feels like to disappear while standing in the center of your own life. It was a Tuesday evening when it happened. Not a grand betrayal, but something more intimate, more personal. The kind of moment that doesn't make the room go silent, but makes you go silent inside. Kelsey had invited me to a client appreciation dinner her agency was hosting. It was formal, catered, floral centerpieces, real linens. One of those events where everyone sips wine and flashes polite smiles while talking about square footage. She said, "I'd love for you to come. It would mean a lot." I dressed carefully that night. Soft green blouse, gold locket David gave me our last Christmas together. I even wore heels, though I hadn't in years. I wanted to make her proud. I wanted to be the kind of mother she could point to and say, "That's my mom." When I arrived, Kelsey barely glanced up from the group she was chatting with. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, handed me a glass of white wine, and whispered, "Mingle, okay? I'll pull you into the group in a bit." So I did, or tried. I spoke with a woman who managed interior staging, a man who built custom cabinets. They were pleasant enough, no one asked who I was, and I didn't force it. I smiled and nodded, and let the night unfold around me like I wasn't really there. Eventually, Kelsey stood up to give her thank you speech. She looked beautiful, sleek dress, hair pinned back, voice warm and confident. She was born for a stage, that girl. I watched her with pride. She began by thanking her team, her mentor, her assistant, then paused, smiling toward a table near the front. "And of course," she said, "I wouldn't be who I am today without the woman who showed me what hard work looks like. Please give a warm welcome to my second mother, Carla Morgan, who raised me after my dad remarried and taught me the meaning of grace and grit." Applause filled the room. I blinked. Carla Morgan stood up 2 tables away, beaming. I'd met her once, a quiet woman who married Kelsey's father years after I divorced him. She and I had exchanged maybe 10 words in our lifetime. I didn't clap. I didn't move. I just sat there frozen as everyone turned to smile at her. Kelsey never looked my way, not once. Later, she came to my table, bubbly and breathless. "I hope you don't mind," she said. I thought it would be simpler. Simpler. I asked, my voice low. She glanced around. I mean, it was a professional crowd. It just made more sense this way. I nodded slowly to pretend I never existed. Mom, please don't make this dramatic. I just didn't want to get into my whole childhood story. It's complicated. My whole body went cold. The years I spent raising her, the scraped knees, the sleepless nights, the spelling tests, the heartbreaks, the college tuition I helped cover after her father refused were now labeled complicated and inconvenience. Something to tuck away for appearances. I didn't say anything else. I didn't trust my voice to stay steady. I simply stood, thanked her for the invitation, and walked toward the exit. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit my chest like a wall. I sat on the curb and stared at the pavement for what felt like hours, not crying, not shaking, just empty. The humiliation didn't come from strangers. It came from my own daughter in a room full of people she wanted to impress. People who would never know who really raised her, who really gave up everything for her to shine. And the worst part? She didn't even think I'd care. She assumed I'd smile and swallow it. That night, I didn't go straight home. I drove with no destination, just the soft hum of tires against asphalt, the streetlights bleeding into one long blur. At one point, I pulled over near the old elementary school and just sat there, staring at the empty swings swaying in the wind. It hit me then, not just the pain, but the realization they weren't hiding me. They had already erased me. It happened on a Wednesday, quiet, ordinary, unthreatening. That's how betrayal often comes, not with shouting or slammed doors, but with coffee cups and softened voices. I had just come back from the market. My hips were aching from standing too long in the checkout line, but I felt good. I'd picked up Evan's favorite granola bars and a bottle of wine Kelsey once mentioned liking. It was habit at this point, buying for them, thinking of them even when they weren't thinking of me. As I unpacked the bags, I heard a knock at the door. It was them, together. That was unusual. Kelsey was dressed sharply in all black, as if she were headed to a showing. Evan had on his work shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to look relaxed but deliberate. They smiled like realtors greeting a buyer. My stomach tightened. "Hi, Mom," Kelsey chirped, stepping inside without waiting. "We just happened to be in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by." "Both of you?" I asked. Evan shrugged. "Yeah. Figured it was time to sit down and talk. Clear the air." Clear the air? That's the phrase people use right before they strip something away from you. They followed me into the kitchen. I put the groceries on the counter without unpacking the rest. Kelsey moved around the kitchen like she owned it. Evan sat at the table and pulled out a thick folder, not a manila one this time. This one was leather-bound, professional. He opened it carefully, like it was a menu. "Mom," he began, "we've been thinking a lot about your future. You've done so much for all of us, and we just want to make sure you're secure." I raised an eyebrow. "Secure?" Kelsey jumped in. "Exactly. We want you to enjoy your later years. Less stress, more rest. That's why we met with someone, a financial advisor, and they helped us put together a few documents." Evan turned the folder toward me. "It's just a simple authorization. You'd still live here, of course, but we'd help manage everything. You'd be hands-off, no more maintenance worries, no more bills. We'd take care of it." I didn't reach for the folder. "So you'd own the house?" I asked quietly. "It's more like a transfer of responsibility," Evan said. "On paper, yes, the title would shift, but practically nothing would change. We just want to protect you from myself," I said, my voice colder than I meant it to be. Kelsey placed her hand over mine. "From stress, Mom. That's all. You've held on long enough. It's time to let someone else take the wheel." I looked down at her hand, soft, manicured, firm with quiet control, and realized how far we had drifted. She didn't see me as capable. She didn't even see me as the woman who raised her. She saw me as a property risk. "I'd like to read it before signing," I said, finally gently pulling my hand away. "You don't have to," Evan said quickly. "It's just boilerplate legal talk. Nothing tricky. But you'd still rather I didn't read it? Neither of them responded. I closed the folder and slid it toward the center of the table. I'll review it tonight. Kelsey's face tightened. Mom, we really don't want this to become a whole thing. I'm sure you don't. I stood slowly, not out of drama, but because I needed to feel the ground beneath me. The house felt different now, like I was standing in a waiting room built from my own memories. They exchanged glances. Well, Evan said, clearing his throat, let us know by tomorrow. There are timelines involved. Timelines? I watched them walk out, laughing about some parking ticket Evan got last week. Just like that, no hug, no warmth, not even a backward glance. They weren't worried I'd say no. They were sure I would give in the way I always had. I didn't cry. I didn't call Helen. I didn't open the folder. Instead, I went to the hall closet and pulled down the small lockbox David had kept hidden behind the winter coats. Inside were dusty folders, old tax returns, and the last copy of his will. My hands shook, but not from fear, from resolve. They thought I would fold. They forgot who taught them how to read between the lines. That was the night I decided they may have tried to push me out, but I was going to walk out on my own terms. Rock bottom isn't a moment. It's a slow unraveling, a quiet disappearance. You start noticing only when the silence gets too loud. It was the morning after they came with the folder. I hadn't slept, not really. I'd spent the night at the kitchen table, staring at that leather binder like it was a ticking bomb. At some point, the sky shifted from black to gray, and I realized I hadn't turned on a single light. I poured myself a cup of tea, not the kind with honey or lemon, just hot water and bitterness. I didn't even sip it. I just held it because I needed to hold something. The house was dead quiet, no kettle whistle, no David humming while reading the paper, no grandchild's laughter echoing down the hall, just the hum of the fridge and the sound of a life once full, now echoing through hollow rooms. To the living room and stopped in front of the fireplace. The photo of David and me from our 30th anniversary sat there, a bit dusty but still proud, his arm around me, my eyes crinkled with laughter. We had just come back from a cabin trip the kids had surprised us with. They said we deserved something special. I stared at that photo for a long time. What changed? Was it me? Did I love too hard, give too much? Did I blur the lines between mother and servant, or was it them slowly growing into people I wouldn't have recognized if I met them as strangers? I carried the photo to the couch and sat down. My knees creaked, my hands trembled, not from age, but from heartbreak. Not the sharp kind you feel in sudden loss, the dull kind that seeps in when you realize you've been grieving something that isn't even gone yet. I started crying, not loud sobs, not the messy kind that needs comfort, just tears that rolled down silently while I stared at our frozen smiles. That afternoon, I got in my car and drove aimlessly. No music, no destination, just miles of suburban quiet and the heavy press of memory. I passed the diner where David and I used to go every Saturday morning. It was a Starbucks now. I passed the park where Evan learned to ride his bike. The path was paved now, sterile and straight. The crooked little hill where he scraped his knee was gone. Everything was changing. Everything was being rewritten without me. Eventually, I ended up at the cemetery. I hadn't planned to. I didn't bring flowers. I didn't bring words. I just stood there in front of David's headstone and whispered, "You'd be so disappointed in them." I knelt down, resting a hand on the cool stone, or maybe I added, "You'd be disappointed in me." Because here's the truth I hadn't admitted to anyone, not even myself. I had let it happen. I had taught them that my time didn't matter, that my boundaries could be moved, that my name on a deed or a title or a decision wasn't important as long as they were happy. I was happy, except I wasn't anymore. I was tired of being the good mom, the one who smiles politely when they push her out of family photos, the one who signs things without asking, the one who makes excuses for their absence, for their forgetfulness, for their transactional love. I had given them everything, and now they wanted to take what little I had left. I sat there until the wind picked up, until the light started fading, until my bones felt cold and my soul even colder. And then I whispered something I hadn't said in years. I need your help, David, just one more time. I didn't know what that help would look like, but for the first time in weeks, I stood up a little taller. As I left the cemetery, I didn't have a plan yet, but I had reached the bottom, and there's something powerful about standing on a floor that won't cave in anymore. Because when there's nothing left to lose, you finally start remembering who you were before the world told you to be small. After that day at the cemetery, I came home to a house that felt different. It hadn't changed, not physically, but something inside me had. The silence didn't feel as suffocating anymore. It felt revealing, like the stillness finally had something to say, and I was finally ready to listen. I went upstairs, peeled off my shoes, and stood at the foot of the bed David and I once shared. I looked at the bookshelf he built on the wall across from me. He crafted every shelf himself, sanded and stained it one summer just because he knew I loved the smell of pine. Most of the books hadn't been touched in years. Manuals, family albums, an old globe. I ran my hand across the spines and paused at one, estate planning and family law, a relic from when David took it upon himself to make sure our affairs were ironclad, as he used to say. I pulled the book down and felt something shift behind it, not inside the pages, but behind the shelf itself, a soft, hollow knock. I reached up, pushed gently, and the back panel gave way. It was a hidden compartment David never told me about. Inside was a small stack of papers, yellowed slightly with time, held together by a single metal clip. On top, a sticky note in his handwriting, "Only if you ever need it, D." I held it like a relic, a message from beyond, a whisper that he somehow knew I might one day be standing here, not grieving his absence, but battling the betrayal of our own children. I sat on the edge of the bed and slowly unfolded the documents. They weren't just duplicates of the will. They were revisions, updates David had made during his final year when he knew the cancer was winning. There were notes scrolled in the margins, questions he wanted to ask the lawyer, alternate scenarios. If May is pressured, if one child manipulates, if Kelsey pushes early sale. It was like he'd seen it coming. He didn't name names, but the words were clear enough. Among the papers was a notarized document, a directive granting me full authority over any changes to the estate, no co-signers needed. Even more telling was the contact sheet, Mr. Danner's full information, labeled with a star and underlined twice. Call him, always keep him updated. I sat back, stunned. David had been preparing for the possibility that I might one day stand alone and be forced to defend everything we built from the very people we built it for. It wasn't just protection, it was trust. David had trusted that I'd do the right thing, that if it ever came to this, I wouldn't fold. He knew I was strong enough, even if I hadn't remembered that myself. I picked up the phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the contact sheet. 3 rings, then Danner Law. This is Philip. The voice was older, slower than I remembered, but unmistakable. Mr. Danner, I said softly. This is May Whitlow, David's widow. A pause, then warmth. May, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I found the documents. I'm glad you did. And just like that, I began to remember who I was, not just a mother, not just a widow, but the woman David trusted to protect his legacy, the woman who raised a family, ran a household, paid bills, survived loss, and kept showing up. Mr. Danner asked me to come in. We made an appointment for the next morning. But even before I hung up the phone, I knew the tide was turning. I looked back down at the note. Only if you ever need it. I whispered out loud, I need it now, David, but I also need me, and she's coming back. That night, I put the folder in my purse and left it by the front door. I made tea, real tea with honey and lemon. I sat by the window, not to wait for anyone, but just to enjoy the quiet. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like the start of something. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, no alarm, no birdsong. Just the unfamiliar feeling of clarity. For the first time in a long time, I didn't wake up heavy. I didn't dread the silence of the house. I didn't brace for disappointment. I felt focused. There's a strange kind of strength that comes after you've been broken, a quiet fire that starts not in anger, but in self-recognition. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't see the woman who cried over forgotten birthdays or who waited for calls that never came. I saw a woman who had spent decades surviving, building, loving deeply, a woman who had given everything and now finally was ready to reclaim what was hers. I wore a navy blouse David always liked, the one with the little pearl buttons. It didn't shout power, but it made me feel composed, grounded. I slipped the folder into my tote bag, pressed my hand to the front door frame out of habit, a quiet blessing I'd always done before leaving the house, and drove to Mr. Danner's office. His office hadn't changed in years. Same wooden plaques on the wall, same leather chair in the lobby that squeaked if you leaned back too far, same framed photo of him and David shaking hands from their days on the community council. It felt comforting, familiar, like walking into a chapter of my life that hadn't been touched by what came after. He stood to greet me. His hair had gone fully white, and he moved slower now, but his eyes were sharp. "May," he said, clasping my hands, "you've come just in time." We spent over 2 hours going through the paperwork. I watched him flip through pages, underline, mark margins, nod occasionally. "These are good," he said. "David left you everything you need. They don't stand a chance if they push this." "I'm not trying to destroy them," I said softly. He looked up. "Of course not, but you're not going to let them destroy you either." That sentence stayed with me when I left his office. I didn't go straight home. I drove to the library and sat in the corner reading room. I used to take the kids there on Saturdays. Evan would rush to the science section, Kelsey to the fairy tales. I used to read gardening magazines and jot down ideas in a little notebook. That notebook was still in my glove box. I pulled it out, flipped past the tomato recipes and landscaping sketches, and started writing on a fresh page, not a journal, a record, a quiet reclaiming. I wrote, "Call bank, confirm ownership titles, ask Danner to send copies of deed protections, check if the voice recorder still works." And then, without even meaning to, I wrote something else, "Stop apologizing for being right." It hit me then how long I'd spent apologizing for asking questions, for doubting intentions, for wanting to be included in conversations about my life, my home. I had learned to say sorry before saying no, just to soften the blow. I had trained myself to disappear without making anyone uncomfortable. But now, I wasn't interested in disappearing. I went home and opened the file drawer in the hallway, the one I hadn't touched in months. Inside was a small digital recorder David used when he coached debate students at the local high school. I clicked it on. The battery light blinked good. That evening, I made a real dinner, rosemary chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, not because anyone was coming over, not because I needed to prove anything, but because I wanted to eat something warm and nourishing for me. After dinner, I sat on the back porch and watched the sun set through the branches of the oak tree, the same tree Evan used to climb, the same tree David once tried to hang a swing from and failed hilariously. I closed my eyes and said aloud, "I'm still here, not for them, not for the past, for me." That night, I slept soundly, no haunting thoughts, no questions, only certainty. Something inside me had turned back on, a quiet fire that had been dimmed for too long, and now that it was burning again, there would be no putting it out. By the time the weekend arrived, I had stopped waiting for calls not because I gave up on them, but because I had finally started choosing me. They assumed I'd sit quietly with the folder, that I'd worry, second guess, maybe cry a little. They expected delay, then surrender. They did not expect preparation. That was their first mistake. I began with the bank, a quiet trip early in the morning before the lobby filled. I wore my wedding ring, my Sunday blouse, and brought every important document I could find. The teller, a young woman named Emily with kind eyes, led me to a desk in the corner. When I asked to speak with someone about property titles, I said with a smile, "I just want to confirm a few things," sliding over a copy of the deed David had updated before he passed. 30 minutes later, I left the bank with everything in my name confirmed, verified, and printed twice. I slipped the folder into my purse like a shield. Then came the utilities, the insurance, the property tax board. One by one, I cross-checked accounts, updated contact information, and locked everything with security pins. I changed passwords. I signed up for paperless billing that went directly to my email and mine only. Small steps, quiet steps, but with every one, I felt the power shifting back into my hands. No one needed to know what I was doing. That was the beauty of it. Evan and Kelsey were texting now, not often, but just enough to pretend they still deserve trust. Any updates? Just checking in, everything okay with the paperwork? Let us know if you have questions. We can walk you through it. I didn't answer right away. I let hours pass, days. When I did reply, I kept it simple. Looking things over, we'll be in touch soon. Polite, neutral, deceptively agreeable. They didn't know I'd already met with Mr. Danner, not once, but twice. The second meeting was longer. He'd gone through every clause of the document they gave me and explained it with patience I hadn't even realized I needed. They want to move ownership now so they can leverage the equity. He told me plainly, pushing his glasses up, it's not about protection, May, it's about access. Access to what? I asked, though I already knew. Your house, your money, your silence. He leaned forward then, voice low but firm. You don't owe them that. That night, I opened the drawer where David kept our old voice recorder. I made sure it worked, tested it twice, then slid it into my handbag. Not for a confrontation, not yet, just in case. Then I took a walk through the house, slow and purposeful, and made mental notes. What needed fixing, what needed preserving, what memories lived in each corner. I went room by room, not mourning the past, but anchoring myself in the present. This was mine, not the square footage, not the paint color, the living that happened here, the effort, the choices, the love. That night, I stood in the doorway of the bedroom and whispered into the quiet, they think I'm afraid, but they forgot who I was before I became their mother. The next morning, I drafted a new will. Mr. Danner helped me finalize it, legally sound, clear in language, indisputable. I established a living trust and placed the house inside it, not out of spite, but out of wisdom. The trust named a co-trustee, my sister Helen, someone I could count on, someone who wouldn't let emotion cloud responsibility. I didn't tell Evan, I didn't tell Kelsey. I didn't change my tone, my smile, my weekly texts. I let them believe they still had control because that was their second mistake. The first sign that they sensed something was off came in the form of silence. After days of follow-up texts from Kelsey, any questions? Still need help reviewing. There was suddenly nothing. No pings, no calls, just a still waiting quiet, the kind that means someone's holding their breath. They were expecting something from me, a signature, a surrender. When it didn't come, they paused, they circled. That was their third mistake. I went about my days like nothing had changed. Grocery shopping on Mondays, book club on Wednesdays, a phone call with Helen every Thursday evening. I planted a new round of snapdragons in the front garden, something I hadn't done in years. It wasn't for them, it was for me, a small living reminder that I was still here, still blooming. But behind the scenes, I was no longer surviving, I was moving. Mr. Danner had already filed the necessary documents to move the house into the trust. Legally, I was now untouchable. The home wasn't mine in the way they understood. It belonged to the trust, overseen by me and Helen. There was no loophole, no access point. Even if I passed tomorrow, they wouldn't be able to touch it without going through her, and Helen doesn't bend for anyone. I slept easier that week, and for the first time in months, I started walking without looking over my shoulder. Kelsey texted again that Friday, "Hey, just wanted to confirm if we should move forward on the paperwork." Evan found a buyer. If we act soon, found a buyer. I reread the message, stunned, not because they were still pushing, but because they had already moved forward as if I had agreed. They were counting the money before I'd even lifted a pen. I didn't respond immediately. I waited a full day before replying, not ready to move forward. Please do not make further plans without my signature. That was all I said. I could practically feel the temperature shift through the silence that followed. Then Evan called, not texted, called. That hadn't happened in over 2 months. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message, his tone light but too rehearsed. Hey, Mom, just wanted to check in. No pressure on anything. Let's talk soon, okay? They were nervous, not because I'd said no, but because I hadn't said yes. That's when I knew the power had shifted. It wasn't in a dramatic speech or a slamming door. It was in my stillness, my silence, the fact that they no longer knew what I would do next. They were used to predictable May, the dependable one, the one who would panic at the thought of disappointing her children. But now I was playing by a different set of rules they didn't write. The following Sunday, Evan showed up unannounced. He rang the bell, then knocked. I opened the door but didn't step aside to let him in. I just stood there. Hi, he said, surprised. I was in the neighborhood. I'm sure you were. He hesitated, then forced a smile. Just wanted to touch base. Kelsey's worried you might be confused about the documents. I'm not. That hung in the air longer than it should have. He looked down at his feet, then back up. Look, we didn't mean to pressure you. But you did. Another pause, then came the sentence that told me everything I needed to know. Well, we thought you trusted us. There it was, their illusion cracking under the weight of my boundaries. I did, I said calmly, until you stopped treating me like a mother and started treating me like a problem. He looked genuinely stunned, not hurt, confused, like it had never occurred to him that I had the right to feel betrayed. I think you should go now, I added, stepping back inside. He didn't argue, just nodded and walked away slower than he'd arrived. When I closed the door, I felt it, not triumph, but peace. Not because I had won something, but because I had taken something back. The day I invited them over was a Tuesday, calm skies, no tension in the air, the kind of day people forget. That was exactly the point. I told Kelsey and Evan that I was finally ready to talk. I let them believe I was coming around, that the silence, the hesitation, the they were just nerves. I suggested we meet at home, where your father would have wanted us to sit down. That part was true. They arrived together, which I expected. Kelsey came in first, holding that same leather folder, the one I had returned to its place in the drawer, untouched, unread by their standards. Evan followed, his smile already sliding into place like armor. Hey, Mom, he said casually, setting his sunglasses on the console table. We're just glad you're ready to get this moving. Kelsey nodded, adding, we brought a notary too, just in case. Of course they did, but I was ready. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have guessed, was that I had already spoken to Mr. Danner that morning. He'd arrived 15 minutes before them and was seated in the den, his briefcase on his lap, waiting with the calm of a man who has seen this exact scene play out 100 times before. I made some tea, I said lightly, gesturing toward the dining room. Let's all sit together. The notary looked surprised. Oh, she said, I thought this would just be a quick signing. I believe it'll go even quicker if we're all on the same page, I replied, smiling. Evan and Kelsey followed me in. Their pace slowed when they saw Mr. Danner seated comfortably in one of the armchairs, flipping through a familiar-looking document, my document. He looked up, smiled politely. Good afternoon, Kelsey. Evan. They stiffened. What's going on? Kelsey asked, setting the folder down a little too hard. Mr. Danner didn't flinch. I was invited. May had a few questions and some clarifications to make. Evan folded his arms. Clarifications about what? I sat down across from them and folded my hands on the table. About the document you asked me to sign and what it would have cost me. Kelsey shot a glance at Evan. Mr. Danner reached into his briefcase and pulled out 2 sets of stapled papers. This, he said, tapping the first stack, is the document you brought her, a property transfer granting you full legal control of the home, its contents, and the surrounding land. May would have no claim to it after signing. That's not how Evan stammered. She would have remained physically in the home, Danner interrupted, but not in control of it. You could have sold it, refinanced it, or evicted her legally. No one was going to evict her, Kelsey snapped. But you were going to control her, I said quietly. The room fell silent. Mr. Danner continued, and this, he said, holding up the second set of documents, is the new trust. May has full control. Upon her passing, ownership passes to a third party of her choosing, not necessarily either of you. Evan took a step back. You went behind our backs. I protected myself, I replied. From my own children? Kelsey's voice cracked. We were just trying to help. Help would have looked like a conversation, I said, my tone firm, not a transaction. Mr. Danner stood. The papers you wanted her to sign have been reviewed, documented, and archived. There will be no further action taken. I suggest you shred your copies. They stood there, not speaking, just absorbing, not angry, not yet, just exposed. I trusted you, I continued. I trusted that you saw me as more than a burden, but the moment I became inconvenient, you tried to manage me, not love me. That ends now. Kelsey's chin trembled. Evan looked at the floor. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cry, I didn't even shake. I just stood in my own home, at my own table, and reclaimed my place in the very center of it. When they left, they didn't hug me, they didn't look back, and I didn't follow. 3 days passed without a word from either of them, not a text, not a call, not even one of Kelsey's carefully composed emails. The silence was louder than any argument could have been. But this time, I didn't sit in that silence wondering if I had gone too far. I knew better now. Still, I wasn't naive. I expected retaliation, confusion, maybe guilt, but I didn't expect what came next. It arrived in the mail, a crisp white envelope addressed to me in Evan's handwriting. No return address, no warm salutation. Inside, just a letter 4 short paragraphs long. It read, Mom, I'm sorry it came to this. We just wanted what was best. I know we handled it wrong, but now that you've put everything in a trust, I hope you realize you've left us with nothing. Please reconsider. We're still your children. Evan. That last line, you've left us with nothing, struck a nerve, not because of what it said, but because of what it revealed. After everything and the meals cooked, the tears wiped, the sacrifices quietly made, what they really saw me as was a source of something, property, money, a transaction in waiting. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer with David's handwritten note. The contrast between the two couldn't have been starker. One man gave me everything to protect myself. The others only stayed close long enough to try to take it away. The final twist came not in that letter, but a week later during a community fundraiser at the church. I hadn't planned on going, but something in me, maybe pride, maybe the need to feel surrounded by people who still knew me for me, told me to show up. I wore my soft gray shawl, the one Helen knitted years ago, and brought a tray of lemon bars like I always used to. I hadn't been there in months, but the moment I stepped in, familiar faces turned toward me with smiles. May, we've missed you. Where have you been hiding? Those are your famous lemon bars. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. Halfway through the event, Pastor Lawrence, who'd known our family for decades, called me to the stage. We've got a little surprise, he said, winking. It's long overdue. As I stepped up, he handed me a small plaque, my name engraved beneath the words, A Life of Quiet Strength, May Whitlow. The room filled with applause. I stood there, stunned, humbled, not because of the honor, but because I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen for something other than a role to serve someone else's needs. And that's when I noticed them, Kelsey and Evan, standing near the back. I stood there, arms crossed, watching. They hadn't clapped, they hadn't smiled, they hadn't expected this. They had come maybe hoping to see me broken, humiliated, but they found something else, a woman standing in front of a crowd who respected her not for what she owned, but for who she was. Evan looked down, Kelsey looked away. That was the real justice, not the trust, not the protected deed, not the exposed lie. The real justice was standing tall in a room full of people who didn't need anything from me and still celebrated me. The real justice was them realizing, maybe for the first time, that I had built something that couldn't be signed away. I walked down from that stage, and as I passed by them, I didn't speak. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My silence said everything. As I sat back down and passed out lemon bars to the children tugging at my sleeve, I felt something even deeper than justice. I felt free. It had been nearly 3 weeks since the fundraiser, since the plaque, since the moment I walked past my own children and chose not to speak. I had half expected a storm after that, angry texts, dramatic ultimatums, maybe even another visit. But nothing came until one Thursday afternoon. Just as I was finishing my tea, the doorbell rang. I glanced out the window, half expecting a delivery. It wasn't. It was Evan. He stood there on the porch, hands in his jacket pockets, looking smaller than I remembered, not in stature, but in presence. The confidence that usually padded his shoulders was gone. What stood before me was not a man trying to gain control, but a son who no longer knew where he stood. I opened the door but didn't step aside. Evan? Hi, Mom. His voice was quiet, careful. Can I talk to you? Just talk. I waited for a long moment, then nodded and let him in. He didn't go to the kitchen like usual. He stood in the foyer, staring at the family photos on the wall, the same wall he'd once passed 100 times without looking. His gaze lingered on one in particular, me holding him on the front steps, both of us grinning, a popsicle melting in his hand. He was 5 years old in that photo. So was I, in a way, 5 years into being a mother, still learning, still giving. I miss this house, he said finally, softly. I didn't think I would, but I do. I didn't say anything. I wanted to see where his words would go when they didn't have a landing pad of my forgiveness. He turned toward me. I didn't come here to argue or to change anything. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Really sorry for everything. I nodded once. Thank you. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It was honest. He shifted his weight, looked down, then back up. I think I convinced myself it was practical taking over the house, the paperwork, the planning. But deep down, I think I was afraid of what would happen when you weren't here. I thought that by controlling everything, I could stop things from changing. Change isn't always a bad thing, I said, but betrayal is. And I want you to understand something, Evan. It wasn't about the house. It was never just about the house. It was the way you went about it, like I didn't matter. He nodded slowly. I know, I see that now. And I hate that I made you feel disposable. I studied him. This wasn't the same man who'd handed me that folder with a rehearsed smile. This was my son again, the boy who once asked if thunder was God moving furniture, the boy who used to leave me sticky notes in his lunchbox saying, I love you, in crooked handwriting. But the truth is, I no longer needed his apology to feel whole. I forgive you, I said, but my voice was calm, not emotional. But I'm not forgetting. That's the difference. He nodded again. I understand. We stood there, a mother and son separated by more than years, by choices, by silence, by assumptions, but also bound by something deeper. Something that might never return to what it was, but didn't need to be severed either. I don't expect you to trust me again overnight, he said. I just hope maybe we can start talking again. Slowly, maybe, I said. He didn't stay long. He didn't ask for anything. He just said goodbye with a soft, take care, Mom, and walked back to his car with his shoulders a little less heavy. When the door closed behind him, I didn't cry. I didn't replay the conversation or doubt myself. I just exhaled and poured myself a fresh cup of tea. He came back on his own, without a plan, without a pen. That didn't erase what had happened, but it meant something, and that was enough not to rebuild everything but to take a single step forward on solid ground. It was a Sunday morning when I finally allowed myself to slow down. No noise, no visitors, no tasks pressing on my to-do list. Just the golden light of early spring filtering through the kitchen window, warming the counter where David used to set my tea each morning without fail. One sugar cube, just the way I liked it. I made it myself now, no sugar, just honey, not because I was trying to cut back, but because my taste had changed, like so many things. I stepped outside onto the back porch, wrapped in my shawl, and took a seat in the wicker chair that creaked every time I shifted. From there, I had the perfect view of the garden. The snapdragons I planted a few weeks ago were already stretching upward, their little buds nudging open, stubborn and brave. It made me smile, not because they were beautiful, though they were, but because they had bloomed in soil that had been nearly forgotten. I hadn't tended to that garden in years, but the roots hadn't died. They'd just been waiting. So had I. I took a sip of tea, closed my eyes, and let the stillness settle in me like a soft blanket. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt no urgency to defend myself, no ache to be seen, no pressure to chase after approval that should have come freely. Instead, I felt full not of things but of peace. Everything that had happened over the past few months, the manipulation, the silence, the confrontation, had stripped me down to my core. It was painful, ugly, humbling, but it had also given me a gift. I hadn't expected the chance to remember who I was before they decided who I should be. I was more than a mother, more than a widow, more than the title on a house deed. I was May Whitlow. I was the woman who built a life from nothing with a man who loved me fiercely, the woman who raised 2 children without a handbook, who gave without conditions, who forgave even when she shouldn't have. And now I was the woman who had finally chosen herself. That didn't mean I'd stopped loving them. Love like that doesn't just disappear, but it did mean I stopped measuring my worth by their acknowledgement. I no longer needed to be needed. The porch wind chime danced softly in the breeze, its familiar song pulling a memory from deep within me, a camping trip David and I had taken the summer after Evan was born. We were exhausted, clueless new parents, barely sleeping. I'd stood by a lake at dawn, holding our baby in one arm, feeling like I was crumbling. And David, in his easy, gentle way, had said, "May, strength isn't loud, it's quiet. It's what stays standing when no one's clapping." At the time, I didn't fully understand it. Now I did. I reached for the small box I kept beside the chair. Inside were the documents from Mr. Danner, a copy of the new trust, and David's original note. I pulled it out and read it again, as I'd done so many times in recent weeks, only if you ever need it. I smiled. I needed it, I whispered, but I needed me more. In the distance, a car pulled into the drive. It was Kelsey. This time, she hadn't been by since the confrontation, but today she got out of the car holding a pie, peach by the looks of it, her favorite, not mine. She approached slowly, uncertain, almost shy. I stayed seated. "Hi, Mom," she said. "Can I sit for a bit?" I didn't answer right away. I just gestured to the chair beside me. She sat down. We didn't speak, not yet, not about the past, not about the house, just sat, 2 women who had lost their way, trying to remember how to begin again without stepping on the quiet. I didn't know what would come next, whether healing was truly possible, whether the cracks could hold love again. But I didn't need to know, because I had finally found the one thing I'd been searching for all along. Not justice, not revenge, not apology, wholeness.